Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Outsource members meeting. Delighted for you to join us. And today we've got a real spotlight on the contingent workers, the candidates, but also coming at it in a couple of ways. So I'm going to introduce you in a second to Paul Beasley. He's the director of Beyond Theory, which is a business training and coaching business. But actually and Paul's business specializes in customer excellence. But my involvement with Paul came about because of a voluntary group that Paul's the chair of called Engage for Success, which is really focused on employee engagement. They're part of a movement that really is championing the benefits of employee engagement. So he's going to talk to us, to you all in a bit more detail about a study that Engage for Success have conducted and give you the kind of view of our findings. And following Paul, ultimately any questions, as I say, pop them in the chat. And then following Paul will be Stella Smith, who I had the immense pleasure of meeting not that long ago, actually. She's the CEO founder of Perks, which is an amazing product. And she's going to introduce that in a bit more detail. And it links beautifully with employee engagement, whether that be on the contingent side or on the permanent side. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Paul, please.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now. Is that okay?
Perfect.
And what we should be able to see here is a nice white screen with contingency worker engagement. Is that good? Hello? Is that good?
Yeah, good.
Okay. Right, thank you very much. So delighted to be here. As Mel introduced me, Paul Beasley. I'm not the chair of Engage for Success. That's led by a gentleman called David McLeod and Nita Clark. And Engage for Success has been going since for the last 10 years or so. But what I do lead is this contingency worker research group, and you can see the names of the people who are involved in the bottom right hand corner. So the information I want to share with you is I want to say where we're coming from on this, because it's quite unusual that it's about employee engagement, but are we talking about employees? We're not, but I'll come back to that in a moment. I can talk very briefly about the process that we use to get our data and the survey that happened towards the end of last year. And of course, the key part of this is to share those findings with you. So if that's okay, that's what I'd like to do. So I did mention that I chair a group, and these are they. It's a lovely blend of expertise. I come from a leadership, customer excellence type of background, and others are from like legal, from academics, and so forth. So you can see that we're very lucky. We've got a very, very sort of diverse group of talented people on our group. So where did we start with this? Well, we've been looking at this issue for the last year or so, because what we want to do is to sort of like understand how does employee engagement work in terms of a contingent workforce. Because there's lots of stuff out there on employee engagement, and I know one or two academics have looked at in the past about contingency worker engagement, but there's nothing really that we found was relevant or up to date. So that's what our mission is. And the key questions that we wanted to address are, what are these legal constraints that surround worker engagement? Because they are not employees. There are certain rules and regulations that are in place that can actually cause some issues when we talk about involving people in engagement surveys and how we treat people at work, etc., etc. But of course, you know, the argument about employee engagement impacting levels of service and productivity in the UK has been made for many, many years now. But what we'd like to do is to explore, well, what are the levels of engagement for contingency workers, and what's the impact on productivity and levels of service? Because obviously that's very important to us as businesses, as a country, etc., etc. And then the final point there is, does anybody care? You know, that was one of our key points. But as we are talking to people, as we are conducting this research, it's very obvious that people do actually have a view on this and do care. So, you know, the world of contingency workers is growing. These stats here, which have been supplied by OutSource, you know, it's really quite interesting. It sort of like confirms all those views that we have anecdotally about contingency workforce growing because of people's need for flexibility or desire for flexibility of work. I guess, you know, the employees or the workers want it, but so do companies as well. So, you know, I think this is like quite an important sort of like landscape that we have. So when we started our research, what we wanted to do, so this is before the survey was even issued, we looked at some views. And of course, we have to have a starting point. And one of the key points that we wanted to start at is you know, do people have a choice about being a contingency worker, and how does this impact on engagement? And of course, there's like security and feeling insecure. Now, I accept that these feelings can be very much put onto employees, but yeah, our feeling is that if somebody is a contingency worker, are they choosing to be one? What's their impact on engagement, etc., etc. Now, another piece of information that we had to sort of like deal with is all the complexity around contingency workers, and you can see here that these are the sorts of like buckets, if you wanted to describe it that way, about how people can be described in the workforce, and you can see how they're divided up. And I accept there may be some more, but I want to point out, and we talk about this survey, not all these groups are included. So what's the survey? Let's get on and look at this survey then. So the group that we looked at were these. Now, we needed an organisation in the contingency worker space to help us with this, and Workwell, you may know them. They helped us with this survey. So they provided our database of people, and that they actually sent the questionnaire to their people. We didn't know who they were or whatever, but you can start to see here the makeup, which was quite interesting, of all the people that contributed to the survey. So you can read this for yourselves, I'm sure, but one of the interesting points is that most of the people were umbrella. Most were male, 60 to 40 maybe, roughly speaking. Then we've got the different groups here, and most of the groups were education, technology, social and healthcare. An interesting point, was an age demographic there too. An interesting point is that our question was really about, do you consider yourself to be a blue collar or a white collar worker? And most people didn't know what that was. So that was a bit of feedback for us. Is that outdated and so forth? So you might well have a question or a viewpoint on that. Okay, so that was the audience, if you like, the population. We did get 649 respondents. We wanted a survey that was quite quick, and the survey ran for most of November last year. So this is the first sort of headlines data to share with you, and you can see here that by far the most people were agency workers were in education. And you can see here that when we get to financial, technology and engineering sectors, most of them were working for umbrellas. And that was quite interesting because we started to look at what types were engaged or whatever their response is. So yeah, a key finding for us was, yeah, most people in education consider themselves to be agency workers. And then going on to the index here. So as I said, we work a lot on employee engagement. And what we wanted to do was to say, is there any correlation, or how does it compare, rather, with contingency worker engagement and employee engagement? So in our questionnaire, we had 3 questions going to the contingency workers that were really centered around this engagement index, which we use with employees. And that was really about how satisfied are you? That's the blue line. The brown line, orangey line, is do you choose to be a contingency worker? And the green line is very much about would you recommend being a contingency worker? And you can see along the top there, we have 66%, 54% and 59%. The big yellow box is what we call our engagement index. And what we found was that, good news, that the UK employee engagement satisfaction is 62%. That was something we calculated last August. And for contingency worker engagement, it's almost the same, 60%. So did that surprise us? Maybe we might have had some sort of like views that maybe we're thinking that employees were going to be more engaged than contingency workers. But a key finding, I think, is that they are very, very similar. But a question for us and for you, I guess, is how satisfied are we that with 60%? So, you know, I always talk about this. If you imagine if you have running a factory and only 6 out of 10 of your machines were working fully, you'd probably want the, you know, to get people to come and have a look at them. So, you know, it's the impact on productivity and levels of service, which is like really, really key. So hopefully we're telling a bit of a story here. And to continue, the next chapter is really around these headline results about choice and do I plan to be a contingency worker in 3 years' time? So yeah, 70% lifestyle choice said yes, 71% said yes. But those who choose to be a contingency worker, or sorry, expect to be a contingency worker in 3 years' time was a lot less than that. It was actually 52%, and that represented our lowest score. As a leadership and management training company, we spend a lot of time on in talking about feedback and everything else. Interestingly, that's only 54%. Okay, so next chapter. The key question is link between lifestyle choice and loyalty. You know, is there a link there? Let's have a look at pay. We wanted to look at one of the questions was about, are you financially worse off or the same or better off as a contingency worker? 22% of people in our survey said that they are actually worse off. Big question for us. More than 1 in 5 respondents are financially worse off by being a contingency worker. So a question for us is, why is that the case? Why do they continue to choose to choose to be a contingency worker if they're financially worse off? And what's the impact of this on levels of engagement? So if you think about you know, contingency workers in a broader sense, about serving people, being factory workers, etc., you know, this is quite a key point from a low pay point of view, we feel. So, and does this affect engagement? Well, let's have a look. We've got some more results here about engagement and feeling and low pay. So what this is telling us is that the financial impact and levels of engagement are actually linked. So there's a correlation here between low engagement and low pay. And again, as I said a minute ago, what is the impact on productivity and customer service levels? So what this graph is actually saying is that the lower the engagement and low pay is actually, so 54% of people are feeling worse off are in the lower engagement. If you look at the opposite end of the graph, you can see high engagement. People aren't worse off. They're feeling a lot better off. And that may provoke some questions later on that you may have. So clearly there is a link between engagement. There's a correlation between link between engagement and people's levels of pay. This is our final graph. I don't want to overload you with information, but what this is telling us is how does financial impact and loyalty correlate with contingency worker engagement? So what this is saying is that there is a link. There is a link between people saying that they are worse off and their engagement is low, and also about how they are feeling about loyalty. The question was, are they seeing themselves as a contingency worker in 3 years' time? So we look at the left-hand side of this chart, and on the right-hand side we can see how high engagement, financial impact makes no difference at all, whatsoever. So that's what I wanted to share with you briefly, in a brief way. But I think what would be quite interesting is for me to sort of like discuss with Mel or any other questions that you might have about engagement as a concept and how it relates to productivity, levels of customer service, as well as any particular questions you have about the survey. So what I'd like to do is just to summarize that, you know, employee engagement between engagement with employees and contingency workers are the same, or they're on par, but they are low. And there is that financial impact of engagement. That is a link there. And this is also links with loyalty and levels of engagement as well. So thank you for listening. Mel, I'm going to hand back to you now to sort of like see if there are any questions from the group and what points would people like to make?
Okay, so at the moment everyone is muted because obviously you're presenting, Paul. So what I would encourage is if anyone's got any questions, if they put it in the chat, then I'll unmute them so they can obviously talk to Paul directly. I've just got a question, Paul, on in the summary in terms of, yes, what you're basically saying is employee engagement across the board. It doesn't matter whether they're permanent or non-permanent people. 60% is pretty pants, isn't it, really, for us? And we seriously need to think about that with our own businesses. But when you've highlighted twice, I think, in this around this financial impact and the link to engagement and loyalty, I'm assuming that that's the same for permanent staff as it is for non-permanent staff.
Well, there's two different types of motivation. There's the extrinsic, which is the pay, and then there's the intrinsic, which is like how people feel about the organisation. And those both impact, in my view, they impact employee engagement. In my experience, when people feel that their level of pay is fair, then their engagement, that tends to like disappear from that engagement debate. It's when people feel that their pay is insufficient, then I would say yes, we need to recognise that that pay does actually impact, or low pay does impact motivation and engagement and so forth. So this is a bigger question that you posed about the UK economy, you know, in its entirety, about people's levels of pay, because I do think that people do have a big sense of fairness.
I think as well, as you know, it's a massive piece at the moment around the government agenda, which is all around productivity, and they're coming at it regardless. They're not thinking of contingent labour at all in that scenario. They're thinking solely of employed staff. But we've all experienced good customer service and bad customer service. You'd never ask somebody, are you a permanent employee or a non-permanent employee, and you would just believe that they didn't enjoy their job when you've experienced that poor customer service. And I guess you're at the front end of and seeing that all of the time in your role, aren't you, Paul?
Absolutely. And customer service, or we prefer to relate to it as customer excellence, because customer service isn't good enough for most people these days. The customer doesn't see who you are. They don't know who's paying you or whatever. They just see the company. And I just think that's so important to remember, that people's views on service. I mean, most people don't complain. Our stats say that 9 out of 10 of people just walk away, because most customers are choice rich and time poor. Right. So that they just go. And so this is like a real big thing that everybody needs to be aware of. But and we all know, we've all been in a restaurant or in a cinema or in a shop or wherever, and we can tell straight away whether somebody's engaged. And a big question for me is that person, are they an employee? Are they a contingency worker? Well, how are they being treated? But I do like to talk about there's a lot of stuff here around the people's contracts of work, and does a contract of work impact people's engagements? I would say probably not. It's about how people are treated. But the contracts of work between contingency workers and employees they're not the same, and sometimes they can be counterproductive to actually engaging people, as I mentioned earlier.
We've got a couple of questions come in, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
Karina, I've unmuted you. Can you speak? Can we hear you?
I can.
Hey,
you can. Well done. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I guess the question I had, and you've just briefly touched on it, Paul, because with the cost of living and everything like that, I guess the financial element of it is it would always be there. But the question I had was more just touching what you talked about in terms of the kind of engagement and how they are treated, and when they are, how that impacts on their engagement as well. Is that still a prominent factor, would you say? Because we
absolutely
we manage, and we did a lot of research, and Mel, you'll know what I'm referring to in relation to this, but it was a lot around how those contingent workers were treated by the kind of supervisors, managers, and how they were kind of welcomed into their roles, which also drove engagement kind of positively. But I just wondered if that was still a thing now as well.
Yes, I mean, the biggest driver of engagement, I feel, is how people are treated by their employer. And Mel and I were talking about this recently, that when you join an organisation, you rarely get to meet the CEO or the MD or whoever. The person who actually impacts your day is your immediate manager. And so how people are treated by their immediate manager is so important. And as you sort of like stay with an organisation, you may get to know about the culture and meet people from the top of the organisation in due course. But on a day-to-day basis, how you are treated and managed and led by your own manager is really important. So I'm talking about coaching, feedback, training, all that kind of stuff, and just generally looking after people.
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure, Abigail, Connor, whether you've got a question. You had your hand up. I have let your mic. I've opened your mic. So if you've got a question.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, there was a correlation between the contingent labour force in terms of their willingness to recommend contingent labour as a form of occupation that they were having, but then their engagement was remarkably low. So what's the nexus between them suggesting and saying that they're happy working as contingency labour, but then their engagement with that contingency labour or the manager, as you mentioned, being so unresponsive?
To be honest, we haven't looked at that in that detail, but all I know is that recommendation is saying that I would recommend you come and work with this organisation is a key signal of high engagement. But that is something we would need to look at. So, we've got a lot of data here, and I think what we wanted to do first of all is first understand what the key things were, and then as we progress, we're looking to do more surveys, and that's a good point for us to investigate further. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think as well, Paul, it was true to say that there were certain sectors where it was predominantly better than others. When we were looking at the survey.
Yeah, the education group were the low paid and low engaged, whereas the IT group tend to be higher.
Financial
paid.
Services, wasn't it? Financial services.
Yeah, were higher grades.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can. That's a good piece of information to share. Yes.
Yeah, there were definitely. And social care was also one, but there wasn't huge population, of the total survey. It was quite diverse across different sectors, so it'd be really useful to focus in on one particular sector. One of the folks on our steering group of Engage for Success is actually a lawyer, and when she gets to the point of looking at how contingent workers are treated, she's at the real, coal face of it, and at the worst possible moment, it's gone totally wrong, and the worker is taking either the end employer or the recruitment company to court. So she sees it, very much at the worst possible time. So some of our feedback she found extremely enlightening and surprising, but also again was put that down to, is it because we had predominantly professional services, professional workers rather than skilled workers rather than unskilled workers in this particular survey. So there is an opportunity to perhaps explore that a little bit further, but certainly the majority of the outsourced members and APSCo UK members work in professional markets. So that's kind of less clear. I think the biggest point for lots of folk here should be also around their permanent staff, because it is saying that, permanent people, 40% of your workforce are not engaged. That's quite scary, I think.
Absolutely, and it's the damage that's doing in terms of productivity, service levels, motivation, employee retention. Everywhere I go in my day job at Beyond Theory, all organisations are struggling.
Yeah.
To recruit and retain.
Abigail, go again.
Sorry, thank you very much. To what extent do you think the Workers' Platform Directive will increase people's engagement, and certainly from a contingent labour perspective, their nexus between being happy with their job and the flexibility that it offers, and then obviously the satisfaction that they would probably get dependent on where the Workers' Platform Directive ends up, because it could potentially take a lot of contingent labour into that employee realm. And for me personally, I work for a recruitment entity.
Yeah.
That piece of legislation and the idea that we would then be put as an employer rather than an agency with no direct employment agreement with individual is sort of quite a risky and a nerve-wracking time at the moment.
Yeah, and Abigail, to that point, and I know we've got some other questions coming through, so I'll move on. And just to that point, one of the things we did recognise with Workwell basically pay those workers that were surveyed. They don't manage them day to day. Obviously, they're payrolling them, doing their accounts, whatever, and they are working for, ultimately, Abigail, one of your end customers. So the engagement levels we were measuring in terms of how they're made to feel at work, and and how engaged they are, with the exception of the pay and how they're paid, really is the end customer's view, isn't it? It's what they're doing. So I think that being responsible and being able to influence it is a tricky one. But I will pass over to Karina again. I think, Karina, you've got a question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's a question or it's more just a kind of something that's picked up on from the conversation you've had, because it talked on one of the slides about contingent labour, saying that it wasn't financially, I think you said it wasn't financially kind of working for them, temping. So I guess it ties in with the element of, in such a talent short market, do organisations just need to be doing more to push through the temp to perm and the perm opportunities for people, accepting that there's always a potential price differentiator within that. But I guess that is just an interest. Maybe a miss is the fact that from an engagement perspective, that's not being pushed enough to talk through the opportunities on a permanent basis that are there.
I think, Karina, I'd like to take a step back and say, most people come to work to do a good job. They want to do good work. They want to do meaningful work, and they want to have a good relationship at work with the managers and the people around them. And I think all employees, whether they've got all employers, whether they've got employees or contingency workers, have really got to focus on looking after their people, because that's just so important. And it's like, this is why I feel that giving people feedback on their performance is really, really key. Because people want to come and do a good job, and they crave feedback on their performance to know how they're doing, and that shouldn't make a difference whether what type of employment contract they have, because people are workers, or they're people first and workers second, and yet we go, because of all the legal constraints, we go around categorizing them, put them into certain buckets, and they get treated in a certain way because of what bucket they're in, and there are very good legal reasons for doing that. And that's why one of our, if going back to the very beginning of the presentation, one of our key points is to look at those legal constraints. Are they helping or hindering? So I think you probably know where I'm coming
exactly
from.
And I think I know we've got one particular lawyer on the meeting today, but we're going to need to move on quickly. But I think one more question. Helen, do you want to ask your question? You should be able to. I've unmuted you.
Hello.
Sorry, Paul. It might be me, not Helen.
Muted yourself.
Yeah. Helen, can you try and speak now?
Yes, sorry, I think I'm here now.
Brilliant.
Hello, thank you.
Thanks.
Like questions / observation again regarding the financial impact and engagement. Just wondering, maybe in the survey, what particularly was asked about, say, the financial element, because let's just say one of my clients in the manufacturing industry, again, they've got perm staff and we employ contingent workers, but obviously with AWR we would be paying comparable rates for the same role. So is it maybe the financial impact, say, for blue collar or white collar workers, say maybe bonuses or other elements they could get, maybe the white collar role, that's more of an impact for them, say, to the blue collar, let's say in nursing, if you've got a contingent worker, a nurse or a healthcare worker who generally maybe just paid their flat rate and not potentially any bonus, what kind of financial impact was kind of seen from the survey? Because like I say, if the comparable rate's going to be the same, what other financial impact or drivers are there for the engagement?
Well, one piece of data that we didn't get, and it's like whenever you do a survey, you always ask, you know, you always regret not asking something. You know, that's just life. It's always difficult to get a perfect survey. But the question that we asked was, how does working as a contingency worker affect your financial situation? And there were three options. I am better off financially by working as a contingency worker. I'm worse off financially, and it doesn't make a difference to my financial situation. They were the three questions that we asked. What we were going to do is to actually go back and see what responses were by people's levels of pay, if that makes sense, okay, what pay bands, but we haven't done that yet. But I can see where you're coming from, and yeah, it's a really good point you raised.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you very much. Paul, if you could stop sharing your screen, yes, that would be great. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm delighted that Stella Smith is joining us this afternoon. Stella is the CEO founder of APSCo, and yeah, over to you, Stella, to share and tell us about APSCo.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Mel. Let me just share, and we had some wibbles on this before we started. So let's see, should see a flash of my Outlook, and then I should press a button now, and hopefully you get my slides up. Did that work?
Yes, it did.
It was well worth that 2 minutes practice before we came in. Excellent. Well, look, good afternoon, and lovely to meet you all, even though I can't see all the faces. As Mel said, I'm CEO and founder of APSCo, and I think Paul's presentation actually just led very neatly into this one. So some of the things that we say just echo what Paul has shared from the survey. So what I'd really like to do is use the presentation that I'm about to show you clearly to link the link between well-being and engagement and productivity, specifically in the contingent worker space, but more importantly, share some of the anecdotal examples that APSCo in its relatively young history has had in the practical implementation of that, because I think it might be useful, or there may even be comments at the end that we will find useful going forward to try and get this right. And I think looking after people, how people are treated, all the ways in which that last presentation closed off are very dear to me. So I'm going to kick off. And let me just press the button to move the slide on. So the problem I found as a founder of APSCo, I ultimately had a number of small businesses that had a number of workers that were self-employed or contract workers, and I wanted to give them the benefits that I had been given when I was an employee in a large organisation, and I found it very hard to build them, which is why I ended up building APSCo. And then over the last 3 or 4 years, the whole reason I couldn't put it in for my small businesses, what we found were appropriate for much larger organisations, i.e. they were expensive, difficult to integrate. I'm going to show at the end that we found that, contingent workers and the kind of organisations we work with now are shaped very differently. So the solutions that were out there just didn't fit or didn't work, or indeed there wasn't any access to them. So let me dig down. The link between well-being, engagement and productivity. First of all, I think well-being was a very wishy-washy word to me anyway, before COVID. Of course, we now all have sort of well-being at the forefront, and particularly this audience, you'll be far more akin to it than I am, even with my APSCo background. But the human element, I think the last comments that were just made, that it's people first. If we're not well, then none of us are at all. And that, irrespective of how you're engaged by an organisation, who you work for, anybody is a person. If we're not well, then it changes the outcome of our day. But here are some stats that you can see, and I'm just going to pick out a couple of these. Organisations prioritising wellbeing see 45% increase in employee loyalty and retention from Willis Towers Watson. Employees with wellbeing support achieve 40% better work-life balance whilst working remotely. I thought it was really interesting looking at Paul's graph, seeing the comparison between engagement and pay, essentially. What this is really saying is that there is a link between well-being, when you look at lots of stats and lots of data that's out there, between engagement and productivity. So in terms of the people affected by that, when we talk about people, it's not just the worker, it's the company that has, we believe, or we've seen now, that has positive outcomes from getting well-being right for the individual worker or person. So for the company, there's a benefit in terms of attracting and retaining top talent. I think we just heard Karina mention the word talent shortage, and it seems to be something that I come across all the time now. Increased engagement and productivity. Be really interesting to run another survey to find out that if you do employ these things, does it actually make a difference other than just pay? Maybe I can see a perks survey of the future coming up. Reducing absenteeism, we've definitely seen impact in that, not just in contingent worker space, but certainly in the employee space as well. For the worker, well-being, doing things to support well-being improves mental health, which can obviously enhance focus, productivity, creativity, job satisfaction, resilience, overall well-being. The perks team has a whole host of stuff that backs up these quite out there statements. Improve physical health, higher energy levels, reducing sick days, boosting stamina, and basically overall physical, because some jobs still involve physical performance, and clearly that helps. And improved financial well-being has an absolute impact on stress and mental health and physical health as well. So there's lots of links between that. Essentially, that as part of the mix, not just pay, but working conditions and the like, that well-being has a major part to play within that. Some more stats, and then I'll get onto some of the personal things that we've seen. Contingent workers' impact on output. We've got a slightly different stat. I think we go with Mel's and outsource stat, but suffice to say, we know that the contingent workforce is important. It's a part of the makeup of most organizations, and it's growing. And that well-being, companies that prioritize employee well-being experience, they tend to see a 19% increase in employee engagement. This is not specifically to contingent workers, but that we know there's a correlation. And it was interesting to see Paul's stat compare that the engagement was the same between contingent workers, or very similar, and employees. So I think, we can't just naturally say that's a broad brush across everything, but isn't it interesting? And perhaps it tells us the same. 82% of contingent workers say that access to wellbeing benefits would make them feel more valued. So as I said, I don't think Paul's presentation could have lined up this one any more than I could have asked for. A little bit about perks, but not a lot. The reason we so what perks is it's I basically wanted to get all the lovely benefits I had been given as an investment banker to my workers, who were 300 subcontractors in my cousin's building firm, 64 self-employed massage therapists, and I couldn't source them. I went to Mazars, head of employee well benefits, rolled out for my big job title, but basically said they couldn't help because I had contingent workers. So we really built perks on a very small scale. And what it does here in the UK is it gathers together those benefits and services you would get in a large organisation, but gives us the technology, gives us the functionality to be able to serve a contingent workforce, because actually there's some different ways in which it operates practically. From what it includes, because I think that is important, because if you pick a service like this, and there are many good ones out there, not just perks, we're just very specifically were built for this audience. For £3.75 a month, if you go and buy it directly plus VAT, so £4.50, you get 24/7 access to a private doctor, unlimited appointments for the individual plus everybody in their household, as many as you like, no fees, 24/7 counselling, so EAP, given a lot of backgrounds on this call, well, no, but again, we sourced a really good one, so it's for the individual plus everybody in their household that's aged over 16, virtual gym classes, discounted gyms, digital physio, over 40 odd benefits and services for that £4.50, and the individual can cancel at any time, because we believe we need to be good enough for someone to choose to stay. That's what it is, but how it works for the contingent workforce is really driven by technology. So obviously we have to have comprehensive benefits. We know that we need to make it affordable. Some of the organisation, I'm going to talk through 2 user cases or 2 studies of 2 live customers we have now, specifically in a space that I think a lot of people on this call operate in. So we have to make it affordable, because we have to think about minimum wage, and if you're adding costs in, how does that impact? But the things that I know how to do is meant we needed flexible payment payment gateways. It has to be easy to integrate, not creating another resource to be able to manage something ancillary that's not part of the core. That it's customizable where there's multiple brands, and lots of reporting and data, and a demonstrable track record. So we think Perks is quite exciting. But we've launched successful wellbeing initiatives for specifically contingent workforces across multiple sectors now. So there's going to be a couple that I'm going to pick out. One of our early adopters, believe it or not, was one of the big four accounting firms, which for a very small rubbish MVP that I built back in 2018-19, I'm surprised that we managed the 16 page of security that we needed to get through at that time. And clearly we've gone on a journey and we have an amazing enterprise scale piece of technology now. But that big four accountancy firm basically buy Perks for all of their workers on sub 12-month contracts, and for their sort of very short-term workers they offer it on a self-pay basis, which had never existed it before. There's a national staffing and recruitment business, international recruitment firm, local county council, but I'm going to dig into those a little bit more. So here's the national staffing and recruitment business that went live, I think, in October last year. We think it's really important that we answer commercial outcomes as well as people outcomes. And this particular business, they had record highs during COVID with number of workers that they were looking after. And they came off from their record highs. So they wanted to replace the revenues. They wanted to make sure that they continue business. And they wanted to also make sure they had enough people to fulfill those contracts. And so therefore there was a challenge to attract and retain talent. And they also they wanted to be competitive, to use Perks as a tool effectively to be able to retain that worker and make them come back again to them as an agency. So they made Perks benefits available to all temporary workers, and the cost of the membership was actually passed on to the worker. And he looked at this very carefully actually with their legal team, because the big thing is if you just give it and someone has to do something, is there an actual friction point before that happens? So what we worked out is that the best way to do it was to embed it as an opt-out basis. So as this organisation's workers are onboarded, they have the ability to opt out of receiving Perks, and the cost is essentially passed on to the worker. And it's worked really well. In fact, this particular organisation also added in an insurance policy to it as well. So it's not just Perks, they added in something else, but use Perks as a delivery mechanism. And I think the key thing for me with this is that compared to some of the larger organisations where they just have majority employees, what Perks has the ability to do is be shaped in lots of different shapes and sizes. So we found that with all of the organisations that I've just mentioned, that there's a number of cohorts of different types of workers with different arrangements contractually with the organisation that we're working with, and the ability to separate those out and actually have a very bespoke offering for either the underlying client or by cohort of worker was really important. For example, a lot of the workers didn't necessarily work a full month, so our standard pricing of monthly, quarterly and annually wouldn't work. So we do weekly for this particular firm. And then the second one, because I'm conscious we had a lot of questions, is we've just gone live with a local county council. I think this is the first time that a local county council, though you may correct me on this, has actually gone live with offering benefits to contingent workers. We think this is amazing. Like I said, people first. Before I go into the county council, I remember in the very early days of Perks, I had a conversation with a very large technology firm. They have, I think, 400,000 or 500,000 workers worldwide. So you can imagine the size of the organization. And I was sitting down with the head of people globally, and the question went like this, well, what do you do for your workers? And she listed just a myriad of, they had doctors on site, they had nutritionists, they had this, that and the other. And I asked them what proportion of their workforce was made up of contingent workers, and I think they said about 6 or 7% at that point. And I said, well, what do you expect that to do over time? They said, well, we expect it to grow. And I said, well, why do you do all that stuff for your main workers? And they answered all the isms I've learned: productivity, absenteeism, presenteeism, everything that you'd expect from an HR answer. And then I said, and what do you do for your contract workers? And the answer was the bare legal minimum. And as she gave me that answer, there was a people penny drop at that point. And I think I'm very proud of going live with this particular organisation, because they're getting benefits, we think, for the first time too. They have, for example, their social workers, where we think the doctor and the counsellor will have real impact in that day job in terms of some of the things we heard in the last one. So they wanted essentially their skilled contract workers to get the same support that their employed workers receive, obviously making sure that they didn't change the determination of how those people were engaged. They found it challenging because they had contracted local government roles which had high rates of absenteeism. So actually supporting the well-being, looking into why there was, you know, long-term sick issues and high absenteeism, having this kind of services that Perks provides or other organisation provides in that worker space should reduce that over time. And obviously they were paid on a weekly basis, so Perks actually as a solution didn't fit, so we needed to shape ourselves. So we provide critical support. It's to do with the boring stuff. It's to do with, we can shape our proposition. Everyone gets very excited about the price point for the kind of services we have, but actually it's about the fact that our technology can onboard different types and cohorts of people very quickly in under half an hour, and be fully branded, and it can fit with the underlying client, the agency or us. But we can then shape what we do in terms of how people pay for that, who pays for that, where there's not budget to be able to do it. With those multiple cohorts of workers from maintenance to clerical, we're able to shape the Perks proposition to be specific. So I think, look, I think the survey says a lot more. It's my mission and Perks's mission to democratise access to wellbeing for everybody. I genuinely believe it should be a fundamental human right that everybody has access to basic healthcare services and a financial education, essentially. But I think that the market is open wide. And I think now what Perks and others have provided is the ability to participate. And I guess the question I'd like to leave everyone with is, you know, this is possible now. Does it fit with your organisation? Is it you? Is it somebody else? But fundamentally, there's people at the bottom of that. And I think if you can make it work with commercial intent and you can see a people benefit, that if it's possible, do you want to say, I want in or not? So that's probably it, Mel, just to open it out to you and as a starter for 6.
Thank you. Brilliant. Yeah, we've got a question. Tom, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak. Can you?
Hello, Tom. Tom's banned from being able to.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. There you go. You're on, Tom.
I've let you in, Tom. You're one of my mates.
I'm on. Thank you very much indeed. Hello, Stella.
Hello,
Tom here from Alvius. So I had 2 questions. The first one was the perks you talked about. I may have missed it, but I mean, could you talk a bit about what the perks actually are?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think you talked about a slightly higher level than that. Would it be interesting to know what the sort of, you know, is it Tesco vouchers, or is it, you know,
yeah, of course,
financial well-being? And the other question was, and this is sort of from my experience, I assume this is something you think about a lot, the friction and the challenge of onboarding someone who's going to work for, you know, 4 weeks to an app or to a new system, and they're probably, you know, it's one of 10 jobs they've done in the last 2 years. How do you think about that? How do you go about that?
We've done that, so that's an easy one, but I'll start with the first one because it's a bigger answer. So I mean, look, the key services we find used at the moment, so there's 40 odd benefits and services in Perks UK. The first one is the GP, so we have a private GP service, as I said, unlimited appointments for the individual plus everybody in their household that's a family member. So that's a GP as you would go to an NHS GP, but it's a private one that can issue prescriptions or referrals. Unlimited appointments. I have a 5-year-old, so I've used it 13 times, I think, unfortunately, this year so far, and we're only in May. So that's a key benefit that we see. I'm going to give you the top 5 and then talk to the others. Then we have a counselling service. It also includes things like care advice. So if someone was looking after an elderly relative, or there's that within it, and also low-level legal advice. But a counselling service, it's all BACP accredited counsellors. Again, it's a 24/7 service in terms of a telephone number. and the individual can call, plus everybody in their household that's a family member aged over 16, because there's slightly different treatment for children under 16. Again, unlimited issues, 6 structured telephone sessions per issue, digital physio, virtual gym classes, discounted gyms, shopping offers. I'm not going to do all 40, or we'll be here for a good, I'll be giving you a demo. But essentially, when I talk about shopping discounts, again, it's you can have vouchers, and we actually did something quite clever. It always irritated me, you had to get a voucher. So I asked my tech team that if we wave a magic wand, can we just magic the money into someone's account? Because that's how I would prefer it to happen. So we made that happen as well. You can connect it to open banking and collect. And it's everyone. It's about 2,500 retailers. So from kind of John Lewis and Marks and Spencer's through to Primark and IKEA and everything in between, and going out and data. It's all the benefits you would expect if you worked in a large organisation, but now you can employ it for a contingent workforce or a contract workforce, or indeed an individual. Did that answer enough? I mean, I can send you something after to give you the. Yeah,
I remember engaging with a company called Perkbox a few years ago. I mean,
yes,
like 7 years ago.
Yes.
And I don't know if the sector has moved on, maybe wholesale. But I remember back then the discussion was very much around that, basically vouchers, discounts and vouchers.
Yes.
And there wasn't that element of
health.
You just mentioned the sort of counselling and doctors and all that kind of stuff. That seems to be the big change.
Totally right. Basically, I hope Perkbox are on the call, because when I went to put it in place for my 64 self-employed workers, we called Perkbox, but they wanted to charge me, because they didn't want to service me, £22 per therapist per month. And basically they priced me out because I had a very small team. And so basically I went in and looked at Perkbox, nicked all the good bits, but then thought it was actually really important to look after the health part, because genuinely these were people I cared about. I wanted to look after the health, so I got all the health services around. So that was our beginning, is we actually looked at what they did. Perkbox are a great company. They do something slightly different to us, but where we separate ourselves, I think, is we built technology specifically to answer the contingent workforce in terms of how it operates, and both sort of for an individual contract worker or indeed a big body of contract workers. So that sort of needs quickly into your sort of friction in terms of the onboarding. Obviously, we work with some larger organisations now, and they each have their own different ways in which they onboard and offboard their workers. And they tend to have, in the main, I think all bar one, have lots of different cohorts within that, different brands, different contracts. Some are umbrella companies, some are direct employees, some are by way of contract, some are, there's a whole myriad of ways. The magic of the Perks technology, so the thing I've spent a lot of effort on, is making sure that there's no friction in that onboarding. So as long as we have the data, who's working and who's not working, the way in which you serve it up, we have APIs, we can take data files. For example, the Big Four accountancy firm sends us a secure data file weekly, and that gives us the number of workers, and we onboard and do all the heavy lifting in terms of onboarding and offboarding. We just match into your data. So that's the way it works. Is that enough of a, I mean, we can take offline and answer any questions, but it's it was that bit. You picked out the two key things really, that I think health, and particularly health of a family as well, the fact that those benefits relate to the family. I don't know about you, but if it's my partner or me or my daughter or me, I'd rather my daughter or my partner were looked after first. And it goes, if someone buys me a bottle of champagne, I'd be very happy, but if someone buys my daughter a teddy bear, I'm all the more happy. And I think that that passes through.
Thank you for that. That was very helpful.
Thanks, Stella. Ollie
Thanks,
Harris.
Thanks, Mel. Just
Hi,
two
Ollie.
quickies. Hi, Stella. Two quick questions for me. One, is this a UK only service, or do you offer the same perks overseas? And then linked to that, could you give us just some vague indicative pricing? I'm assuming obviously there's volume discount, et cetera, but roughly what are we looking at per week, per month, per year?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. So we are UK and Australia live currently. However, I've built a beast of an engine that comes out at the end of June. So I'm expecting to go into another 10 countries. So I think we launch in South Africa later this year, Chicago into the new year, and then we expect to go into 10 other countries. So there's a magical bit of tech that I've built that we've solved with Deloitte, with the help of Deloitte and AWS, that we think will be the best piece of technology on the globe in our space by the end of June. But hold your breath on that one. At the moment, we're live in UK and Australia. Broad pricing, we charge standard in the marketplace. We charge monthly, quarterly and annually. It's £3.75 a month plus VAT, or it's £37.50 a month plus VAT as an annual, and that's the price to the end consumer. There's some savings on that basically it comes down to the best pricing we've done is £3.13 a month. But we can talk about pricing. We also have the ability to carve out certain parts of our proposition. So if we have a specific need at a certain price point, we have the ability to look at what we do and shape that for you because of the technology we have.
And just, sorry, I'm going to be rude, Mel. I'm going to jump into the third one. Just following on from that, in your experience then, the cost of the service, is it being picked up by the end client ultimately, or is it being picked up often by the recruitment intermediary, i.e. out of their margin?
So both is the answer. We don't have a particular drive any which way. It's almost a third. So I can't tell you that one's steering where we've seen it work well. So the two examples I had as an example, the first one, the worker pays for it on an opt-out basis, so it's built into the payroll functionality of that workforce. The second one, the organisation is paying for it and sees it as a way of essentially getting sticky talent and having workers that potentially would have gone away come back or make referrals back into the organisation. And our engagement rates are really high, Ollie. So look, traditionally in the world of employee benefits, the rates are sort of around 20%. And at Perks, we've been, and look, the measure of engagement is rubbish. You're alive and you've clicked on it means you're engaged, which is just nonsense. But on those really bad metrics, we've been at over 70% since inception. And I think last month we ran at 81%. So to the point that was made earlier, if you've got 6 workers engaged out of 10, we currently have 8.1 workers engaging with our product for every 10 that's delivered to it too. So that's a nice stat for us to have.
Is that all right, Ollie?
Yeah, no, I could keep going. I mean, one without delving into the product roadmap.
Well,
shall I zip it? I'll zip it.
You don't have to zip it. We've got 10 minutes. So if you
last question,
can ask,
promise.
go on then.
The other people on the call probably going, how do they mute me? Without obviously knowing the product roadmap, Perks, the benefits that you've focused on clearly are in that sort of well-being arena. Are there any sort of tangential areas you're looking at? Career development, training, L&D, really closing the whole circle there at all?
Would you know, it's a really good question. So when I first started, I am not the epitome of my brand. So we can't say that, if I stand up, you see, I'm not the most physically fit and everything else. And I think I'm doing good because I've got a bottle of water on my desk today. But the question we had when we first built Perks was, how on earth do we solve wellbeing for everybody when everybody's so diverse? So we have members on Perks who are 18 and those who are in their 70s, people with lots of money, people with not so much money, people from different parts of the country, different mental or physical states to begin with. This is a slightly longer answer because I always believe that nobody's good at strategy. Hopefully some of us have a gut for it, and I'd like to include myself in that. But that if we map data and fact, then strategy becomes clear. And so from that, there were so many data points on well-being. There are happiness indexes. I could look at household debt for financial well-being. So I landed on one data point that my grandmother always told me, which was a dictionary definition, because she always gave the dictionary to, I don't know why, but she did. And the dictionary definition of well-being is the state of being happy, healthy or comfortable. And what I can work out without trying to be strategically clever is what are the determinants of human happiness, determinants of humans being more healthy, and the determinants of humans being more comfortable. So at Perks, we serve up 5 channels, and this is going to answer your product roadmap fully. So we have the health channel, which is your mental and physical health. Wealth is your financial well-being, social interaction and family, reward recognition, which is basically motivation, and finally learning. And even in the learning already, there's free courses, discounts to multiple courses, whether it's learning to speak French, play the guitar, or doing a health and safety certificate course to further your career. There's already content within there included in that pricing. Do we intend to get better in all of our channels, as we call them. We hope that we're more like a Spotify or Netflix than a boring corporate employee benefits thing. So in each of those channels, we have a roadmap to develop out. So some cool stuff that nobody knows which is coming in the same price point. So I'm going to get Digi Eye and ear tests after we've delivered the engine. We've got a really cool music thing that's coming, which some of the NHS trusts have employed, that they improve sort of cancer and heart patients by music, and it's FDA approved. So I mean, that means it actually works. So we're gonna get some nice. So there's loads of this kind of cool, weird stuff like that, and then there's major services that we think make a difference. And there's a roadmap on each of those channels to try and be the best in the world, I hope.
Fabulous. Thank you. Before Mel kicks me, I'll keep quiet, but thank you for the comprehensive answer.
I would never kick you, Ollie, and it's good. The interaction, it enables Stella to talk very passionately about perks. And I when I first met Stella, I think the thing I said when she was telling me about perks, I said, actually, Stella, because she's got businesses and she's brought this together and she's created something, because there wasn't anything on the market that was good enough that did what she needed it to do. I nicknamed her my the female Richard Branson in all of this, in terms of just creativity and just going for it. She really reminds me of that. So yes, obviously the opportunity, perks are a trusted partner of OutSource, and therefore we can make any introductions and connections as any of you wish. You know, just drop me a line and I will make sure that happens. But yeah, Paul, thank you so much for coming on and telling everybody about the Engage for Success survey. I know we've got more to do, and yeah, and it's the starting point. And as Stella said, it did happen beautifully then, that it's, you know, teed her up perfectly to be able to actually say, actually, here's an area where, and it isn't just, you know, perks is not just for contingent workers, it's for permanent workers too, in the sense that a lot of companies just don't have the level of benefits that perks offers. So the opportunity to be able to offer your employees these benefits, particularly around health at this time, is amazing. So thank you, Stella. Really great to both have you as a trusted partner, but to come and tell everybody about perks today. And I'm sure we will hear from you again, and we'll certainly hear from Mr. Beasley again, because we got more to do with Engage for Success, haven't we?
We have.
Yeah, definitely.
6 out of 10 engaged employees is not good.
It's not good enough.
I think perks needs to sponsor a survey for sure, because that was amazing, Paul.
Well, Paul's always open for that, and he's passionate about that engagement, and the government right now are very passionate about productivity, and Stella, you're very passionate about well-being, and all of those things link beautifully. So yeah, there's got to be something there. So for everybody attending the meeting today, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you at the next OutSource event.